Welcome back, friends, to this Season 13, Episode 26 of the Ubuntu podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing, is old tech more fun than new tech? We've got some command line love and all your wonderful feedback. And joining me this week, we have Mark.
Hello.
Hello, welcome back. How you doing?
None too shabby, thank you.
Excellent. And Alan.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Warm.
Yeah, surprisingly warm again. Unseasonably warm, in fact. What have you been doing in this unseasonably warm weather, Alan?
I've been going up into the loft where it is incredibly warm.
Why? Why would you choose to do that?
I'll never learn. Because it is a treasure trove of old computers. And while up there, I dug out a whole pile of old arcade games that I've purchased over the years. And I played with some of them. I have a thing called a super gun.
That sounds dangerous.
I know, right? And it plugs into old arcade games, the kind of things that you would find giant circuit boards inside our upright arcade cabinets. Think before MAME, like forget MAME exists. MAME pretends to be these things. And so it's one of these things that sits in a cabinet, usually with a power supply and a screen and some controls. But what you can do is play them at home with a little circuit board that interfaces that connector on the board to a TV, a domestic TV, and controllers, modern controllers. I say modern controllers. I'm using Sega Mega Drive controllers. Modern, in inverted commas. And you also power it with a traditional PC power supply.
Okay.
And away you go.
So I was fortunate enough to get some first-hand gameplay on these because I popped over to yours at the weekend for a cup of tea and a chat and to drop some random things off that I'd got that you needed. And you just decided today was the day you were going to hook this up. Yeah.
So we dug out a fully wired SCART cable and a 14-inch Trinitron Sony TV and plugged it all in the lounge. And there's me and him stood in the lounge, both holding a Sega Mega Drive controller playing. What did we play? New Zealand Story? Sidearms?
That's what we started with.
It was Salamander, wasn't it?
Salamander 2, yeah. And R-Type Neo.
R-Type Leo.
Leo.
Yeah,
right.
The Japanese one. So, yeah.
So I was particularly pleased to play New Zealand Story. That was an arcade machine that never made it to my local arcades. And I think I borderline nearly bought an Amiga just to play that game, like back in the day. And so I think it was the first board you pulled out and we got working and I got to play the game I've wanted to play for such a long time, actually on the original hardware. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I think that was maybe the first board I ever bought back in 95, 96, something like that. And I went through a phase of buying loads of them. I only bought the ones that I really liked. I wasn't trying to collect them all. I wasn't doing a Pokemon. I was just buying the games that I like playing. So I've got, I think, 13 of them. A couple of them don't work. And what I want to do is repair them, and maybe get rid of them on eBay or...
How many have you tested so far?
About 5 or 6. Most of them work. Some of them you can tell there's dry joints or the chips aren't seated well. None of them have, so far, fingers crossed, got blown capacitors or bulging capacitors or leaky batteries or anything like that you see in microcomputers of the age. Most of them are pretty much okay. Just like pressing down on the board a little bit or giving it a bit of a wobble. Plug it into a TV.
It was quite funny when we were trying to get this all working because there is a button on the Supergun that simulates a coin insertion. And we'd got no picture being displayed out of this thing. But we pushed the coin button and we could hear the arcade game responding. So with no display and a controller, I was making the game bleep and bloop. You know, it was doing something, but we had no picture. And then we figured out we didn't have a fully wired SCART controller at that point. So Alan went off on a mission to find a fully wired SCART controller and suddenly games on TVs.
Yeah, it turns out these things output RGB.
Yeah.
And if you've got a SCART cable that's only got S-video and composite, it doesn't work. So, Dug one of those out. Happened to have one right on hand. It didn't take long to find one of those. Who now has, in 2020, a fully wired SCART cable kicking around in their lounge? Me.
If you've also recently dug out a GameCube, I imagine it came in quite handy.
Yeah, well, GameCube has a special cable, Yeah. So, it was good fun. Been playing with those quite a bit, actually. Yeah. The house is a bit of a mess of arcade boards at the moment.
Wonderful. So, Mark, have you been playing any RPGs with roguelike elements?
No, but I might tell you more about those another time. I have been finishing off my kitchen.
Ah, DIY news. Intriguing.
Yes.
What finishing did your kitchen require?
I mentioned a while back now that I was renovating my kitchen cupboards and giving the doors a fresh lick of paint and some new handles and some new hinges. Well, that was a while ago, and I've just finished.
Wow.
Yes. So we made our way around, took all the fronts off of all the drawers and did them first, and then made our way around one cupboard at a time, taking them down and doing them and drilling some holes for new handles and repainting them and putting them back up with some new hinges on. And it's looking good now. Feels like a brand new kitchen.
Wonderful.
That's nice.
What is your next DIY project going to be?
Well, we might do some more to the kitchen if we get around to it. There's some other things we can do, like covering up the tiles with some paneling, and you can get some stuff to cover the worktop to basically give it a new surface without having to replace the whole thing. So we might look at that. But most of the other DIY stuff I've been doing recently is baby proofing.
Aha, yes.
Yes. Now that my daughter is able to crawl around at quite some speed and pull herself up on things such as radiators, there has been an awful lot of baby proofing going on over the past couple of weeks. And I expect it may continue.
And as Alan pointed out, it's almost Christmas. Have fun baby proofing that. I remember those days.
Hang it all from the ceiling.
Yes, it's funny. You have to suddenly lift everything above about 3 feet off the floor.
Yes, we've taken the approach of putting doors on things and fencing bits off.
Right.
Right, and with that, let's get on with the rest of the show. So, Alan, you posed a question earlier.
Yeah, I've been playing with old stuff, like my arcade boards and 8-bit computers. And it got me thinking, is that old tech, like in general, old tech, inherently more fun than new tech? I appreciate there's some level of fun in a brand new GPU or a new computer or some new peripheral, but I feel like there's more fun to be had in older tech than there is in new stuff. And I would like to discuss that with you.
When you say fun, I assume that you don't mean plugging in an arcade board and playing the game that's on it.
Well, that is inherently fun.
Yes, but I think you're talking about some more specialist kind of fun that people like us, the kind of fun that people like us find in these things that not everyone would.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that I wanted to play the game has led to other things like digging out the super gun and fiddling around with the super gun and maybe digging out my soldering iron and repairing dry joints and stuff like that. I guess some people might not find soldering a whole heap of fun, but, repairing something that's old, giving it a new life and fixing it, there's some element of fun in that. And there's an element of satisfaction in repairing that thing. A brand new thing, you don't need to bust out your soldering iron for a brand new thing that works straight out of the box. That's boring. An old thing that's broken is more fun.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a class of fun to be had in repairing some old technology, but also I think the reason it can be fun is that older technology is more accessible and easy to understand and actually repair yourself. You were talking about your arcade boards, and I know you've repaired a few of them with relatively simple fixes. And earlier this year, I built myself a Commodore 64 by sourcing original silicon and using that silicon on a remade mainboard. And that was simple. Somebody like me could build a Commodore 64, and I had lots of fun doing it.
Well, I don't think that this sort of thing is exclusive to old tech. I don't think you need an old arcade board to have the experience of getting something that's not working well and fixing it and having that satisfaction that you managed to get it to work. Because, Alan, I know that you and I have both watched a YouTube channel called My Mate Vince.
Oh, yes.
Where he buys some quite modern hardware off of eBay, which he knows to be broken. Things like Nintendo Switches and high-end Xboxes, and with, not that much knowledge, cracks out the soldering iron and presses on chips and pokes at them with probes and tries to work out, and has what I consider astonishing level of success at doing it.
Yes, and I enjoy My Mate Vince, and I enjoy his videos, and I've enjoyed vicariously living through his improvement in capability as time has gone on, and his additional tools and things that he's purchased and the skills he's acquired, because early on he was really manhandling and ripping stuff apart, and now he's quite delicate with a soldering iron and even does some what I would call advanced soldering, the surface mount stuff that I wouldn't touch, mostly because of my eyesight. But I'm not entirely sure that he does that for fun. I think he does that for monetary gain. I think maybe if he wasn't doing YouTube videos or he wasn't flipping these things on eBay, I'm not convinced he would continue to do it. So I don't think you can classify that as the same as me repairing a board so that I can play a game of New Zealand Story. I don't think they're quite the same.
Right.
So I would also position that there is new technology that can be as fun as old technology. So one of the things I've been working on for a while now is I have a collection of Raspberry Pis in case molds that imitate classic consoles. And I'm having fun turning those into classic consoles that emulate those machines using controllers from the era with adapters and what have you. But the Raspberry Pi is modern hardware, and that's where I come to the point about the hardware being accessible and easy to work with. The Raspberry Pi is accessible and easy to work with, and I can have just as much fun with that as I can as making an old computer from the 80s.
I would agree with you on that. I think I've spoken in the past on the show that I had a bit of an adventure making my own doorbell. Well, I could have just gone and bought a wireless doorbell off the shelf, but it was more fun to me to buy some electronic bits and plug them into a Raspberry Pi Zero and try and work out how to do all of the bits that you might get with a smart doorbell, but doing it myself. And it's not only the accessibility of the hardware, but also the accessibility of the software to run on it, to do all of the, talking to the bits of electronics, talking to the network, plugging into services which will talk to your phone and things like that. That's available and accessible, and not the sort of thing you can do with an old arcade board and a soldering iron.
I accept that new things can be fun. I'm not making a blanket statement that new stuff isn't fun and old stuff is fun. But my assertion was that old stuff is inherently more fun. And I think part of it is that nostalgia. That thing that this rekindles the thought of, me standing in an arcade, putting 10p's into an old arcade machine in the darkness, spending my pocket money, and that exhilaration of getting past level 3 on R-Type and only having a few 10p pieces left in my pocket, and having an enjoyable time with my friends. It rekindles those memories, and I don't think you get nostalgia when you make a doorbell.
You're right. Now let me.
Unless you made a particularly ornate and classic doorbell and not something with a Raspberry Pi.
Let me tell you about something that happened to me this week. I was reading a story on the BBC News website where the headline said, young people to blame for something. And I thought, I thought, that's not right. I don't think that my friends and I are to blame for that sort of thing. And then I read the article. And I read the age demographic that they were talking about, and they weren't talking about me and my friends because I'm not a young person anymore. Is the reason perhaps that we enjoy playing with older things or get nostalgia from these older things, which isn't available from the newer things? Are we just old? Is what I'm getting at here.
I think there's a part of that. I think there's this natural 20 to 30 year window between you having something and then having disposable income where you can play with that thing again.
Yes.
And so whatever it was 20 or 30 years ago, whether it was Etch-a-Sketch, Big Track, Speak and Spell, Sinclair Spectrum, Commodore 64, whatever it might be 20 or 30 years ago, once you get into that point of you get past now I've started getting a career and I'm started earning money and you've got some disposable income, I think there's this natural tendency to look back and have that nostalgic memory, which is why all of these recreated games consoles are so successful now, because 20 or 30 years ago, the people who are buying them are the people who would have been playing them, who brought up on those devices. And that's why it's an endless cycle, because next year there'll be the N64 and then there'll be the rekindled Wii or whatever it'll be. And so it will go on and on as those people who have disposable income can look back and can rebuy the thing they had as a kid.
And I think it's that plus something else, which is we have some disposable income now. The Commodore 64 that I have rebuilt is the Commodore 64 that I would have wanted in the 1980s, but could never afford. You know, I have got all of the cartridges that add things like network and modem support. I have, get this, I have dual SIDs in my Commodore 64, which was beyond impossible to achieve back in the day unless you shelled out quite significant amounts of money. So I'm able to go back and have the fun I never could have, like 20, well, God, how long ago is this? I mean, it's 30 years ago.
Right, but it's not like you had no fun. It's not like you lived in a cave as a kid. You did have fun as a kid, and you're reliving that now. And that's why I think old tech is inherently more fun. It's because it's fun squared. You've got the fun of when you first experienced this thing, and now you get to redo it all over again. And so you've got double the fun.
I don't disagree with that statement, and I would be a hypocrite if I tried to, because in recent months, since about December last year, I have realised that with the exception of Fall Guys and driving games, I am not interested in contemporary gaming. I have far more fun and enjoyment out of the 8 and 16-bit games that I grew up with, because they're very pick up and playable and put downable. You don't have to invest, a significant amount of time in them. But there is a technology that I have lots of fun with that I get practically zero application out of, and it's very much based on modern technology. And I like to tinker with these AI ML training models that you can run on big fat GPUs of the day and make animated, cartoon characters based on it looking at your face or body movements or what have you. And I have extraordinary amounts of fun messing around with that, but I have no interest in the science behind it or, using it for any sort of sensible use cases, but I find it really good fun.
I think there was a quote that, I think it's attributed to Douglas Adams, where he said something up until the age of 20, everything is new and magical. And from the age of 20 to 30, anything new is something new you have to learn. And then after about the age of 40, anything new is against the natural order of things and shouldn't exist. And I wonder if I'm veering into that kind of realm, that I'm slightly less interested in all this new stuff because it just feels wrong. It feels like against the natural order of things. And maybe we should all go back to, computers that were disconnected from the internet and cartridges where the game was held on a thing that you have in your hand and that you could plug in. And when you turn it on, the game instantly loaded, and you didn't have 0-day patches and you didn't have multi-gigabyte downloads for your system just so that you could play a game. The last game I bought, you mentioned buying modern games. The last game I bought on Steam that I played was 2 Point Hospital, which is a recreation of Theme Hospital, which is like a 20-year-old game for the PC. And so even the new games that I'm buying are remakes of old games. I don't know. Maybe I'm broken. Maybe I'm just old. Like Mark says, welcome to the club, Mark.
And to that point, every time I play a new driving game, I suppose deep down, I'm looking for the same kind of exhilaration that I got the very first time I played Outrun.
You need to set the screen resolution to 320 by 160 and that'll sort that out.
Well, it's not so much that, but just that experience of playing Outrun for the very first time is right up there as sort of my biggest arcade hit that I ever got of being wowed by something. And I think to this day, every time I play a new racing game, I'm looking for that same kind of rush as I start a new driving game up.
Interesting. I'd be interested to hear from our listeners whether they agree with me that old tech is inherently more fun. I'd also like to hear what people get for their continued hit through life, as Martin said. And also, as Mark suggested, at what point do you become old?
And with that, let's move on.
If you love the command line as much as we do, send us a command that will blow our minds, and we might even mention it on the show. Send your command line love to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
So I see, Alan, that you have found a command line love which sounds a little bit crazy. Would you like to explain what's going on here?
So I found this via Terence Eden, the internet's Terence Eden, Eden T basically everywhere. And he created a Walkman out of a Raspberry Pi, a battery, like you do, headphones. But for storage, he used a floppy disk and a floppy disk drive attached to the Raspberry Pi.
Attached, you should note, with rubber bands.
Yes, with rubber bands. Well, there was a USB cable in there as well, but yes.
Did he comment on if using a floppy disk was in order to sort of recreate the bulk of the original Walkman?
I'm not sure you need to ask why. But one of the things, he did this in a series of tweets and then a blog post, which we'll link to the specific tweet in the show notes. But one of them talks about encoding audio so that it fits on a floppy disk. And he gave a command line using Opus Enc, which I've never used. And I know there's an Opus codec, which is apparently optimized for speech, and is used in applications like Mumble and others. But he used Opus Enc and downmixed the audio files to mono, obviously to reduce the file size, reduce the bit rate down, and reduce the frame size down. And all this will be in the show notes. In order to fit songs or podcasts on floppy disks, which I thought was just quite cute. A single floppy disk could hold an episode of a podcast and you could sit and listen to them. So I tried this with one of our episodes.
Yeah.
And I took the master FLAC file that we sent to Joe for him to edit and produce was 142 megabytes. The MP3 for that same episode on the website is 29 megabytes, and the Opus encoded version is 1.3 megabytes, which is just about small enough to go on a floppy disk.
Wow.
And when you listen to it, it's quite a challenge.
Is it like real audio from the 1990s?
It's like a badly tuned in AM radio station.
Right.
The music is really glitchy and there's not a lot of bandwidth there to get the dynamic range of the music. Even our podcast with the music we've got from like 100 years ago. We've got 100-year-old music in our podcast and even that doesn't compress well.
See, old things are fun.
Yes. But the speech is actually quite audible. But like I say, it sounds like very much like an AM radio an AM radio station from the past. It's brilliant. So we'll put all the details in the show notes and you too can listen to podcasts. You don't have to put it on a floppy disk, but you could encode it and listen to it like it was on a floppy disk.
I'm thinking of shelves above where I'm sitting with boxes of floppy disks, and each floppy disk is an episode of the Ubuntu podcast. That feels like a pointless project. Old tech that's fun.
Yeah, it feels like a giveaway for the next episode of the next instalment of Foss Talk Live.
Yes, oh my gosh.
Yeah. You'll have to bring your car because we'll fill your boot with floppy disks.
Floppy disks. Can you still buy them?
Yes.
Oh, well, with that, let's move on to your wonderful feedback. So here it is, indeed, all of your wonderful feedback. We do read it all, but we can't read it all out. So first, Mike emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
To me, software licenses that promote freedom are the central thing, but we can't convince the general public of their importance and value if we can't reach them. The number of my friends and family members that were already using Facebook and Snapchat that even tried my Mastodon server is 0. My goal is a world where free software options dominate the market, and we're guaranteed not to move in that direction if we stay inside a tiny echo chamber. I support FSF goals, but not their strategies.
Eloquently put, and I agree with that sentiment. Gary Ford emailed us a document.
When Alan mentioned that he enjoyed his test drive in his next Pope-mobile, a Tesla, I thought you were all going to expand on the fact that they reportedly have modified Ubuntu running on their infotainment systems. Also, Martin may be interested to know that you can play driving games on the centre screen using the car's steering wheel while waiting to charge.
So, I can't give too much away here, but I'm very much aware of that because the software studio that makes those games that run on Teslas, we partner with at Canonical for a product that we're working on. And we're well aware that you can play that game using the steering wheel in the Tesla in park mode to control the game on the center console. Spoken to the developers of the game about that. It was brilliant. Christopher Patty emailed Pinebook Corner.
No, that's not becoming a thing. First, the suspend resume bug is indeed a real killjoy. I wish Pine at least considered signposting this more clearly, because waking up on day 2 with a dead battery is unfun. I'm running the Manjaro ARM build that came installed with the laptop, and I think you'll find that makes a big difference in terms of performance. I've seen a number of YouTube videos from the community showing that running random ARM builds yields a sizable performance hit, mostly due to the fact the Pinebook Pro has a rather unique big little CPU arrangement that needs special kernel tuning to be properly supported. Interesting. Yeah, I did find Manjaro work particularly well.
Excellent. And Mark Doherty emailed us.
In regards to Season 13, Episode 24, Alan had mentioned about Pine Phone and Pinebook Pro. I do agree that, unless one does most of their work in a web browser, the Pinebook Pro is not quite ready for daily consumption. I'm not sure what your experience with the touchpad was, but on my end, it's hot garbage. About the Pine Phone, Mobian has progressed very nicely. There are updates for it every day, the camera works and 4G calls work. I'm not sure why Ubuntu Touch doesn't support 4G calling on my end. You mentioned Mobian was slow. I would suggest trying the latest nightly build for the best experience.
There's a bunch of good points in there. Yes, I agree the touchpad is hot garbage, and I didn't mention it because I forgot, because I plugged in an external mouse to work around that problem. Yeah. And yes, I was getting updates for Mobian, and I will try it again and update it to latest, because it was good to see an alternative OS, an alternative OS on this on that phone. And I've still got the phone right here, so I'm gonna try out various things. Thank you very much, Mark.
And Midge Cineeve emailed us some more Pinebook Pro feedback.
I had a piece of feedback about the Pinebook Pro. When I first got mine recently, I ended up going through a whole bunch of distros to find one that felt fast enough for daily use. After trying out a whole bunch, I've currently settled on Manjaro with the Sway desktop. I can recommend using the Manjaro ARM installer script, which gives you plenty of options for different ARM versions of Manjaro to install. I found Sway to be the perfect partner for the Pinebook Pro in terms of speed and usability. That's good to know. I haven't tried Sway. That's one of these newfangled, old style, what are they called?
Tabbed window manager?
Tiling
window
things.
manager.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about Sway is an implementation of i3 that runs on top of Wayland, but David Hewitt, who's been doing the work on the elementary version for Pine Pro, pointed out that they felt they were going to get the best experience when they got everything running on Wayland. So there must be something about how the drivers are implemented that suit that configuration. So interesting feedback, Midge. Thanks for that.
Yeah, it's really good to get a whole bunch of Pinebook Pro feedback, because clearly people have them, and they're out there, and people are trying out all kinds of different operating systems. So yeah, keep the feedback coming. I'm keen to hear it, because obviously I've still got the device.
Brilliant. And that is the end of all of your wonderful feedback. And indeed, that is the end of episode 26. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week when we'll be discussing community news, goings on, and maybe an event or two. You can email us at show@ubuntupodcast.org, and we would like to extend our thanks to Joe Ressington for our podcast production services. And if you are looking for such services, head over to joeress.com. Speak to you all next time.